This is the story behind my dream layout, based on the Chicago Northwestern's fictional Pacific Extension. The Wyoming Central Railway was incorporated in 1885 and built their line from Chadron, Nebraska to Casper, Wyoming. It was initially leased to the Fremont and Elkhorn Valley Railroad, which was incorporated into the Chicago and Northwestern in 1903. The line was finished to its final terminal of Lander, Wyoming in 1906. Shortly after that, the Idaho and Wyoming Railroad was incorporated to build a line from Idaho Falls to the south entrance of Yellowstone Park. These are historical facts, but what if the story continued? In keeping with the Northwestern's penchant for hanging on to corporate subsidies, they purchased the paper on the Idaho and Wyoming for the purposes of building 800 miles to the Pacific Ocean. So what would such a subsidiary look like by 1988? In 1908, the Western started building at Riverton, Wyoming, to keep a water level route along the Wind River. At Dubois, the grade stiffens to 1.5% as it tackles the Continental Divide at Tugwatty Pass. Freight tonnage originating along this line consists mainly of timber products, mostly in the form of pulpwood for paper mills. Dropping down to the Snake River is an easy grade as the railroad winds its way around gentle rolling foothills covered in lodgepole pine. And it's here at the bottom that the biggest challenge of the whole line is encountered. 2.5% grades define Teton Pass. Conquering the steep range, trains coast into the important town of Victor, Idaho. Now let's catch some action along this stretch. Rolling along the Wind River, we catch a Rupert, Idaho to Proviso hotshot, loaded with potatoes from southern Idaho and lumber forwarded from northern Idaho. One thing you will notice on the INWW is the serious lack of home road power. Just like the Northwestern, the combination of increased traffic from the Powder River Basin in eastern Wyoming and an aging locomotive roster, the Western has to grab any and all high horsepower units to conquer the 800-mile roller coaster profile. Emerging from an afternoon rain shower, a Roseburg to Fremont hotshot polishes the rails further on up Tugwatty Pass. These trains handle a lot of fruit from southern Oregon and products from the numerous lumber mills in the area. Hence, we are going to see a lot of SP power on the Western. To balance the running hours of so many SP engines on the line, the Northwestern locos can be seen on many trains west of Kansas City to Pueblo and Tucumcari. Now let's take a look at the Idaho Division. By 1910, when the Western's rails were laid into the state, the Union Pacific was not happy. The UP, of course, dominated southern Idaho and did not want any competition, so many compromises were made in order for Western rails to be laid across the state. The big one was the Western agreed not to build any branch lines all the way to the Oregon border. So rails were laid on the western side of the North Fork of the Snake River to Idaho Falls, a major source of interchange traffic with the UP. The Western continued to avoid UP rails along the Snake to the subdivision point of Rupert, Idaho. Tonnage along the Victor sub is heavy with agricultural products, mainly potatoes and wheat. The grade on this sub is mostly flat, so trains can really scorch the rails. Here we catch a Fremont to Idaho Falls drag along the Teton River just west of Victor. Fremont, Nebraska is the beginning of the Cowboy Line and is an important point for handling traffic back and forth with the UP. The UP will sometimes send a train of empties west just to keep them off their busy main line. This train clearly picked up a block of wood chips headed for paper mills in the northwest. The town of Victor is important, as I mentioned. Located at the base of Teton Pass, it's the center of helper operations eastbound. It also hosts the largest maintenance facility on the railroad. To the west, rails breach the Snake River Valley and all the business it provides. Locals are based out of Victor and run to Idaho Falls, picking up reefers of potatoes, covered hoppers of grain, and dropping off fertilizer for the hungry farms along the Snake River. Further west, the Teton River empties into the wide floodplain of the Snake River Valley, where we catch a heavy eastbound Nampa to Proviso Hollow. Led by a rarely sighted Northwestern SD-45, this train gives us a glimpse of the shoestring locomotive budget the Western gets by on. Northwestern's original 45s came without being equipped with dynamic brakes, something that is sorely needed out west. The other two engines were bought secondhand and pressed into Powder River coal service in the early 80s. Years later, they have still yet to receive a coat of C&W green gold. Proviso is the C&W's main freight yard in Chicago, the beating heart of the system. Many trains from the far-out reaches of the Pacific Extension have this yard as their destination, for it's there that the tonnage gets handed off to other railroads bound for the busy East Coast. As you can see, the last half of this train is filled out with empty grain hoppers from the export terminal on the coast. Like any good Granger railroad, the empties and loads of grain can be found going in either direction. Moving on, let's take a look at the Rupert subdivision. Rupert is located midway along the lucrative Upper Snake River Valley, one of the most productive farming regions in the world. While the Union Pacific has branch lines all along the south bank of the river, its main line cuts a more direct path to the north. The Western was forced to bisect these lines, picking up the business on the north side of the river. Not as busy, but important for generating tonnage nonetheless. Forced to join the UP through the Narrows at Bliss, Idaho, they share trackage to Glenn's Ferry, a helper district back in the days of steam power. From there, the Western strikes its own path along the high grasslands and drops into another wide valley along the Snake to Nampa. West of Rupert, we catch our first coal train. Because of the Idaho and Wyoming Western traffic, the Cowboy line never fell into disrepair, like in reality. On my railroad, this idea led to the Chicago Northwestern's entrance into the Powder River coal fields in the late 70s easy, instead of having to rely on the UP's money to build a new line. Westbound coal trains are relatively rare, as most of the Pacific Northwest relies on other power sources. But there are a few customers, and even a lightly used export terminal on the coast. These trains are why dynamic brake equipped Northwestern power finds their way into the Wild West. Outside of Melba, Idaho, we spy a Nampa to Fremont train moving up out of the lowlands. For the keen-eyed, they will notice that the I&WW engines are assigned numbers that pick up where the C&W leaves off. When the Western is lucky enough to participate in a loco purchase, their order is tacked onto the end of the number series so as to avoid confusion with the mother road. This train carries on its back end a healthy cut of covered hoppers full of grass seed, harvested in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, the nation's capital for such business. Here we catch a Roseburg to Proviso heavy freight, powered mostly by veteran SP monsters. Nampa, Idaho is a big town compared to the others on the line, and that means big railroading. Locals are dispatched in both directions to gather up tonnage to fill out trains. Nampa is also the last of the easy miles before the seesaw profile of the Oregon Division. Customers on the SP in Oregon have no qualms about routing their cargo via the Western. It's a more direct route to Chicago than the SP's route through Colorado, with fewer steep grades that can shift and damage loads. The SP doesn't mind handing over road units to the Western because the shop forces at Victor are meticulous in their inspections. The INWW has to be, for they can't afford to have units break down along the road. There's never enough horsepower, and every locomotive must be wrung out down to its last mile. Also, Western trains tend to be heavier, and the Oregon Division is the reason. The Nampa sub follows what is in real life the Union Pacific's Burns branch. In reality, the UP built this line to head off any competition from entering Oregon, who had offered substantial monies to any railroad that would build through Central Oregon to jumpstart the towns and businesses in the area. The UP did not follow through on the deal, and court cases ensued, with Oregon finally giving up the effort in 1935 when the Supreme Court ruled in the UP's favor. On my railroad, the Western heads north to Ontario, Oregon, and its easy final crossing of the Snake River. The line turns southwest and heads up the Mahler River Canyon to Huntura. The grade might be shallow, but the curvature is tortuous. Also encountered is one of the few tunnels to be found this far east. The line takes a slight break to straighten out before diving south in search of a way to jump over the rise of the Steens Mountain Range. The line then glides across the Harney Basin to Riley. At Hines, the Oregon and Northwestern Railroad starts its 50-mile run north to tap what was the largest timber sale in Pacific Northwest history. At Crane, we catch up to one of the more unusual locals on the Western. The Nampa-Roseburg local is a cleanup train servicing the industries strung out along several subdivisions. Because it starts at Nampa, small four-axle units have to be scraped together to get enough power on the drawbar to handle this train. Oregon might be known for its forest products, but employees of the road have nicknamed the division the Mineral Road. Tonnage generated in the area includes silica, talc, gypsum, pumice, and cinders for highway departments. Cement and drywall plants also contribute to carloads. Filling out tonnage is usually empties headed for the ever-hungry paper and sawmills. The train will have an overnight layover in Riley before continuing its languorous journey. Occasionally, a train can be spotted with decent carloads coming off the Burlington Northern and its inside gateway route. In these cases, any power available in Klamath Falls or Bend will do. Though uncommon, they do make for some colorful consists. The money offered by the state of Oregon was one big reason why the Western chose this route. The goal was to tap into the wide-open potential of being the only east-west rail line to hit the coast between San Francisco and Portland, Oregon. Now we move on to the Riley subdivision, without a doubt the loneliest sub on the whole railroad. Marked by its straight stretch through the badlands and ghost towns of the Great Basin Desert, and studded by occasional quarries and mines highlighted with passing sightings, the line gently rises out of the depths of the basin and makes a beeline for the foothills of the Cascade Mountain chain. Things change rapidly at Diamond Lake as the line starts to weave its way along the Clearwater and North Umpqua rivers on another tortuous route to the final division point on the Western, Roseburg, Oregon. Tunnels and bridges abound as the road tries its hardest to keep the grade and curvature to a minimum. But even with tons of dynamite, track speed along this stretch rarely exceeds 25 miles per hour. At Christmas Valley, we catch the Nampa Roseburg local that departed the day before. Now loaded with any westbound tonnage and any and all empties for the mills, 3 jeeps race through a cut in the desert hills. With several more stops to make to drop off little 2-bay covered hoppers, this crew will be lucky to slide into Roseburg under the 8-hour law. This division is notorious for crews dying on the clock, and it's not easy to change crews in the middle of nowhere. The Adamson Act was established in 1916 for all interstate railroad workers, and the Western tries its hardest to follow the rule because keeping costs down is how it manages to stay in the black. One of the trains that is a repeat offender of this concept is our next train, caught at Silver Lake. The CNW makes a good living hauling steel. Eastbound scrap is frequently hauled to the Northwestern Steel and Wire facility in Sterling, Illinois. With access to the Pacific, the CNW exports lots of carloads to the Far East. This Clinton, Iowa to Coos Bay export train requires every last muscle to shoulder the burden of grades that last for miles. It is not unknown to have to send out rescue power to get this stalled beast moving again. Experienced engineers are always assigned to this train. As it eases around a dry lake bed, it's important to realize the value of the Pacific extension. Coos Bay is the only serious deep water port between San Francisco and Portland, a distance of over 500 miles. It's also the closest port for ships arriving from China and Japan, a feature they like very much. Also, the Western's route might be the straightest railroad from Chicago to the Pacific, but it's also the longest, a feature that works well for the railroad when billing by the mile. The Western might not be the busiest transcontinental, with an almost a complete lack of trailer and container traffic, but it pays the bills with efficiency and as much speed as it can manage. Because of the Pacific extension, the Chicago Northwestern has been able to stay solvent and independent, something that is a constant risk in the merger era, though you would not know that by looking at the locomotive consists. We'll catch one last train on this subdivision as it tackles the dry side of the Cascades and starts its way into the National Forest. More EMD 6-axles escort another coal train to the export docks. In 1988, the Northwestern was pure EMD territory. SD-70s, the newest power on the road, are slowly trickling in from LaGrange. The Western had 20 tacked onto the order, and that is expected to ease the burden a bit. The next newest locomotives were a handful of SD-60s delivered in 1984, which we've seen a couple of in this movie. But the Northwestern's mandate is to haul train after train of coal to the Midwest, so it's a miracle that even a few get released west of the Powder River. The last subdivision on this line comprises the winding crawl to the Pacific. Roseburg is the base of all trains making the 80-mile trek to the sea. It also marks the second of 3 interchanges with the SP, a big reason we see so many tunnel motors on the Western. The line leaves the Umpqua River drainage and makes its way over a ridge to Camas Valley and the Coquille River, where it will zig and zag through the coastal range to the docks of Coos Bay. Several tunnels and an army of flange lubricators aid the low-grade journey along the banks of the Coquille. Finally reaching its goal, the rails are met by bayside loading docks and a few modern loading spouts for bulk items such as coal, cement, and grain. one last heavy lumber drag as it winds its way up the grade, over the ridge, and down to the Coke Hill River. The SP makes good use of this shortcut, otherwise it would be a 150-mile detour up to Eugene, over to the coast, and down to the bay. I have plans to add a steel mill at Coos Bay, requiring the need for more unit trains of metallurgical coal and iron ore from the Atlantic City mine close to Lander, Wyoming. An auto import terminal is also in the works, but I don't have the fleet of cars to make it work yet. I hope you've enjoyed this trip through the Northwest and my imagination. Don't be afraid to comment with some constructive criticism if you think there's something I could do to make this idea more believable. One day I will have the room to build a sizable chunk of this idea. Thank you for watching.